What's up guys? Welcome to today's video. Quite a somber video today. Obviously it was announced yesterday that WWE ECW legend Sabu has passed away at the relatively young age of 60 years old. Now, obviously, all of his death hasn't been disclosed at this time. Obviously, not much is known about what led to his passing. We know that he was obviously wrestling the match for GCW not too long ago over the WrestleMania weekend. We know that during that match he took quite a heavy bump on concrete. I'm not saying that definitely was a contributing factor in his passing, but it could have been, it may have been that he actually suffered quite a serious injury. He was probably, it may have been that his injury was way more serious than what he actually realised. Um, obviously, this is, very, very sad news to hear. This one kind of sucks a little bit. This one hurts, knowing that Sabu has passed away and obviously at a relatively young age, at the age of 60. I know there's a lot of people have been questioning whether that match should even have gone ahead because when you look at that match, you can tell that Sabu probably wasn't in the right condition to even be wrestling that match. He was very heavily intoxicated, and you're thinking like, but the fact that he was so heavily intoxicated, why was he allowed to wrestle that match? Why was that match even allowed to go ahead? You know, if that was another promotion like WWE or AEW or Impact Wrestling or New Japan Pro Wrestling, I doubt they would have allowed that match to go ahead with Sabu being in the condition that he was in. I think the fact that seeing that Sabu was in such a bad condition, they probably wouldn't have allowed him to do that match. The fact that GCW allowed him to do that match when he was not in a very good condition, you know, also people that don't question that. It's like, why would you? He certainly wasn't in condition, certainly in the right condition to be wrestling a match for sure. You could see that he was very heavily intoxicated, and he shouldn't have even been wrestling that match. I think everyone knows that. I think everyone knows that Sabu shouldn't have been wrestling that match because he wasn't in the right condition to be wrestling a match. You know, it's just very sad, that he's passed away. Um, another legend that we've sadly lost. Another ECW legend that we've sadly lost. Obviously, we've lost New Jack. Obviously, a couple of years ago, we lost Terry Funk. And now, obviously, we've lost Sabu. Obviously, his death was announced yesterday. 60. The thing is with, yeah, it's not a relatively old. 60 is still a relatively young age, to be fair, Um, it has. This news has, I think, come as a lot. As a massive shock to a lot of wrestling fans. I think a lot of wrestling fans have been left quite stunned. By this news that Sabu has passed away. Because his news has kind of come completely out of nowhere. Obviously, everyone knows that he was wrestling that match for GCW. He wrestled his retirement match but for GC, for GCW, over the WrestleMania weekend. Um, Obviously, he wrestled what would obviously be his final ever match, only to then pass away mere weeks later. Um, we know that as I said, we know that he took quite a heavy bump onto concrete during that match, and there's questions as to whether he actually sustained a serious head injury as a result of that, which he could potentially have suffered a pretty serious head injury. He had suffered a significant brain injury, and he probably did, he probably was far, he was probably much more seriously injured than he actually realised. Sabu probably didn't even realise how badly injured he actually was. To be fair, um, it's like why would you even allow a 60-year-old man to take a bump like that anyway. I mean, I don't think it was, it was an intentional bump. Um, I mean, obviously, when you look at that match, it just amazes me that he was even allowed to wrestle, given the condition that he was in and the fact that he was in such a bad condition. It's like, why was he allowed to wrestle? Because that WWE wouldn't have allowed him to wrestle in that condition. That AEW wouldn't have allowed him to do that. That New Japan Pro Wrestling wouldn't have allowed him to do that. That Impact Wrestling wouldn't have allowed him to do that. No major wrestling promotion would have allowed him to wrestle that match in the condition that he was in. No major promotion would have allowed Sabu to wrestle that match, given the fact that he was so heavily intoxicated, which he quite clearly was. And the fact that he was so like, why would you allow somebody to wrestle a match when they're so when they're so heavily intoxicated? It's like that's you're allowing a wrestler to not only you know put their safety at risk. This is the thing when you're allowing somebody to wrestle a match when they're so heavily intoxicated like that. You know, you're putting that wrestler's safe. Not only are you putting that wrestler's safety at risk, but you're also putting the wrestler's opponent at risk. Why would you? Nobody should have to wrestle somebody that's as heavily intoxicated as Sabu was. That's seriously not safe. And that no major promotion would have allowed that. That a lot of the major promotions probably would have looked at that and gone, no, we're not going to allow you to wrestle that match with the condition that you're in. But the fact that GCW allowed him to do that, considering how intoxicated he was, baffles me, to be honest with you. It's one of those things I don't get. Like, why did GCW allow him to wrestle that match when he was in such a bad condition? Everyone knows that he probably shouldn't have been allowed to wrestle that match because he was in such a bad condition, and the fact that he was given the fact he was so heavily intoxicated. But I guess it is what it is, Um, and you wonder if that bump that he took on. I kind of feel that maybe that bump that he took on the concrete was potentially a contributing factor to his passing. I can't see that that wasn't a contributing factor. I feel like it probably was. Um, I mean, obviously, I've been reading on social media, and I've been, seeing all of the tributes that have been coming in for Sabu. You can really see just how much of an impact he had on wrestling fans. You can see just how truly loved he was by so many fans. You know, and the legacy that he's left is huge. You know, the impact that he had on wrestling as a whole was unbelievable. I mean, you dive back and you watch some of his ECW matches. Some of his ECW matches were absolutely legendary. And some of the best matches that you will ever see in ECW. He was one of the best wrestlers you ever did see in ECW. Sabu definitely is up there as one of the best ECW wrestlers. He's up there with names like the Sandman, Tommy Dreamer. Rob Van Dam was pretty decent when he was in ECW. Um, you know, Terry Funk as well. Another name that I think is up there. There will never be. I don't think there will anyone. But Sabu probably was the best. I don't think there was anyone who was actually better than Sabu. You know, the matches he wrestled were just incredible. You know, but I guess that all of those years of wrestling and taking all of the bumps that he took, as ECW, there were a lot of extreme moments, and Sabu's been through his fair share of extreme moments wrestling for ECW. So it's fair to say that all those years of wrestling has probably taken a huge toll on his body. You know, um, Obviously, my thoughts go out to his family, his friends, his loved ones. My sympathies and my deepest sympathies and sincerest condolences, go out to them today. Um, Today is a day where we will remember Sabu. We will think about the good times and the great matches he had, and just how much of a great guy he actually was. And Sabu truly was a great guy. He was an icon and a legend. He is someone that will never be forgotten by any wrestling fan. I don't think there is any wrestling fan who isn't familiar with the name Sabu. Everyone knows who Sabu was. He was amazing. He was a legend, and he deserves to always be known as a wrestling legend. Simple as that. So I hope you enjoyed this little video. I want to do my own little tribute video to Sabu. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you for another one soon. Bye bye.